Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner, and welcome to a Books Beside My Bed video. For anyone who is new here, I film one of these videos every week where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading, and for anyone who's very familiar with the series, welcome back. Before I jump into my reading stats, I did want to let everyone know that I am going to have a little bit of a feedback survey in the description of my videos for the next little while. If you would like to give me some feedback on my content, feel free to click the link in the description. Besides that, we're going to talk about books. I had a really good reading week, mostly because I was stress reading because work was very stressful this week, but I really enjoyed all of the things that I picked up. So this is my reading week from the 20th until the 26th of June. I read a total of 8 books this week. That included 7 novels and 1 novella, 2,440 pages, and my yearly reading total is 234 books. The first book that I read this week was All Things Burn by Slade, which is a dark romance book, and I've been meaning to read this book for ages. I have, I think, read one Slade book previously, but this book I read after I was in the dark romance live show last weekend. I meant to try and pick it up beforehand, but I just didn't get a chance. And I really enjoyed this one. It is the story of Hallie Temple, who is a young black woman who has trained to be a lawyer, and she works for a women's legal aid centre. She's also being stalked by an ex-partner, and she's really starting to feel unsafe and the police can't do anything about it. She ends up getting the number of a hitman from her cousin, and she decides that she really wants her stalker out of her life, and she ends up contacting Callum. Callum Byrne is an Irish-American hitman. He's very good at what he does, and when he meets her and he hears a little bit about her story, he takes the job, but then he keeps finding ways to spend time around her, which is something he never does, and it's their relationship. I really enjoyed this one. It was dark and there was a lot of violence, and obviously he's a hitman, so content warnings for all of that. I also really liked their dynamic, and I really like Slade's writing style, so I'm definitely going to be checking out more of her books in the future. I also read a NetGalley arc of Witches Get Stitches by Juliet Cross, which is the 3rd book in the Stay a Spell series. You guys know that I love this series to pieces, so I picked this one up because it was such a stressful week and I wanted to read books that made me happy. This is a paranormal romance story, but it is generally relatively light. In the series we follow the Savoir sisters, and in this particular book we're following Violet Savoir. This book actually starts out differently because she met the hero of this story well before the other characters in the book did, and that is Nico Cruz, who is Mateo Cruz's cousin. Mateo is mated to Violet's sister Evie. Everyone knows that there's a tension between Violet and Nico, but they don't quite know why, and that's because years earlier they met at a party, had a one-night stand, and then Violet left. Flash forward into the future, and the two of them are opening a supernatural tattoo parlor together. Violet is a seer, she has very strong magic, and she's begun to investigate ways to create tattoo charms for supernaturals that are longer lasting and that help them with specific problems. The Stay a Spell universe, werewolves are men who have been cursed to become werewolves, so they have very little control over this curse, and they were cursed by witches centuries ago. So she's been working on this charm for Nico, and then some of Nico's old packmates begin to turn up in New Orleans, and they start pestering Violet, and Nico and Mateo are really not happy to see them in town, and the whole thing spells trouble for New Orleans unless they can figure out what it is that Nico's packmates really want. I love this. I love that it's set in New Orleans, I love the Savoir sisters, and I loved reading about Nico as the hero in this story. He was one of those side characters in previous books that I wasn't quite sure about, but I really loved reading his book. And I also liked that we saw their past together. It wasn't long, that sort of 2 flashbacks at the beginning of the book, but it was great. And it was nice seeing all the side characters again, especially the people who work at the Savoir sisters bar. The whole thing just gives me warm, cozy feelings. Then I read Slade by Lauren Donna, which is book 2 in the New Species series. I read this for my Read Digital prompt to read a book written before 2018. Also, I've been meaning to continue the series. Unfortunately, this one was not a favourite of mine. It was okay. There were just parts of it that didn't sit right with me when I was reading it. We follow Dr. Trisha Norbert. She's one of the emergency room doctors who happens to be there when the new species start being rushed to hospitals after their compounds have been found and they've been exposed. And while checking on the patient that has turned up at her hospital, she finds herself being pinned underneath him on his hospital bed. He's whispering all sorts of things to her. A whole lot of security guards rush in, and then she never sees this man ever again. Now, the new species are humans who have been genetically engineered to be part human, part animal. We learned in the first book that they've been set up with their own compound called Homeland, which is theirs to run and police the way that they see fit, and that the world is generally torn on whether or not they accept the new species or whether they think they should all be killed. Trisha ends up getting a job as the doctor at Homeland because she's curious about them. She has never forgotten this moment that she spent with Slade, who is the hero of the story. But when she takes this role, she realizes that the new species really still don't trust doctors, and she spends a lot of time treating the human employees for Homeland, but also that Slade doesn't remember who she is. And this is really disappointing for her. And when he finally realizes it, he realizes that he's in her bad books at the moment when they end up going on a road trip to visit another settlement that the new species are setting up. Their car is run off the road and they go on the run in the wild, and he has to protect her. Along the way, there's a whole series of things that have consequences for the rest of the book. I just didn't feel comfortable with the couple in this book, and that's totally fine. There will be people who absolutely love this. For me, it just wasn't great. There are a couple of things that happen a little bit later on the book where there are some characters who really genuinely care about Trisha, and I just didn't buy sort of the reconciliation thing at the end. Content warnings in this one include violence. There is an attempted rape scene. There is a pregnancy in this book, and lots of fighting. So be aware of that going into it. I also read The Woman in the Back Room by Jessica Gadziala, which is a mafia romance. This was a review copy that I was sent by the author. It is about Santiago Costa, who left the Costa family, but when his wife is killed outside their home in front of him, he goes back to his brother, who is currently the head of the family, and wants back in because he wants to find out who killed his wife. Now, he and his wife were husband and wife only in name, but they'd stayed together because they had a son, Avi. But going after her killers means longer hours, and he needs someone to look after Avi, and so his brother suggests the daughter of one of the other heads of the mafia families in New York, because she has the skills, but she's not really being put to good use by her family, and it also strengthens their ties. And her name is Alessa, and she gives as good as she gets in her family, but because she's female, she is not considered part of the soldier ranks, and so she gets these menial jobs. And she sees this babysitting job as just that. However, when she meets Avi, who I think is 8 years old, she really feels for him. And so she spends a lot of time getting to know this boy who is traumatized by the loss of his mother, but also doesn't know how to connect to his father. And the title is a nod to the fact that she begins to live at their home in the back room. And then things get quite murky as Avi and Alessa are attacked. And they don't know whether it's because of the Costa connection or because of Alessa's connections to her family. I really enjoyed this one. I loved the dynamic between Alessa and Santiago. And I also really loved Avi. He was just a really wonderful glue that sort of stuck this odd couple together. I also read The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie by Jennifer Ashley, which is the first book in the Mackenzies and the McBrides series. This is a historical romance book, and I read it for the Read Digital Challenge to read a book featuring a diverse character. Ian Mackenzie is somewhere on the autism spectrum, but obviously being a historical romance, it's not treated like that at all. And so he spent his youth in an asylum, and he was committed there by his family and was only released by his older brother, who has taken over as head of the family later in life. And Ian believes that his brother got him out because he can use him really effectively to run the family. But because of his time in the asylum and the Regency time period, there are always a lot of rumours flying around about Ian. However, he crosses paths with Beck Eckersley, I think, and she is a widow. She is now currently engaged to a man that Ian does not have a very high opinion of, and so when he meets her, he warns her off marrying this guy and instead proposes that she marry him. And it's a very off-the-cuff thing, total marriage of convenience sort of situation. And it's coupled with the fact that Ian tells Beth that he can't love her. He doesn't know how, but he would protect her, and that's what he wants to do. Beth doesn't initially agree to this, and she goes off to France. And even while she's there, she is drawn back into the Mackenzie family unintentionally. And eventually they all become drawn into a murder plot. And it was just a really fun read. I don't read historical romances all that often. I do enjoy them when I do, but I'm really glad that I picked this one up. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I also read From Scratch by Katrina Jackson, which is Welcome to Seaport Book 1. It is an MMF polyamorous relationship. It's super short. It's a novella length story. I think it's about 150 pages. And it follows Mary Woods, who has left her life as a academic because she is not progressing in her career, and she's also not enjoying it. She ends up moving to this very small town of Seaport that has been desperately recruiting people to try and revive the economy there. and she decides to open a bakery. The first part of the book takes place before the bakery is set up, and she's sort of promoting her wares a little bit, and she ends up going up to the local police officer, Miguel Santos, and offering donuts that he can take back to the police precinct. And it's a super small precinct. I think there's only like 3 of them. But when she takes them over to him, she ends up also meeting his best friend and the fire chief of the town, Billy Knox. Mary is attracted to both men. They're both attracted to her, but what they don't realize is that there is an attraction between each other as well. This story is really about how they come together as a couple and how the town perceives the relationship. But it's super short, and I felt like this book probably needed maybe another 50 pages just to flesh it out a little bit, but I still really enjoyed it, and Katrina Jackson's books are really fun to read. And I had a truly terrible day this week, and I decided to break out the book that I was saving to read closer to its release date, and that was A NetGalley Arc of Uncharted by Adriana Anders, which is book 2 in the Survival Instincts series, which is a romantic suspense series. The first book was Whiteout, which I read last year and absolutely adored, and so I was super excited. I was saving this book and I just had to read it because I had such a terrible day. It is about Leo Eddowes, who is a pilot, and she is a member of the team that originally extracted the 2 main characters from the first book out of Antarctica. She is currently on the hunt to track down a man who may have more samples of the virus from the first book, and then she is asked to rescue a man from the Alaskan wilderness. This becomes more complicated because she is being pursued by the big evil corporation from the first book, and she ends up crashing the plane, and she's rescued by the man that she was supposed to save, and the 2 have to go on the run through the wilds of Alaska, and it was delightfully fun. The hero in the story is Elias Thorne. He is a man with a past, and it takes a little while for Leo to connect the dots to who Elias truly is. Then they have to learn to rely on each other and decide whether or not to give in to the attraction that they have to one another. This was really fun. I don't think I prefer it to the first book, but I still thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I can't wait to see what happens next in the series because it is just such a good romantic suspense book, and I'm beginning to think that romantic suspense is something that I really, really enjoy. And then finally, I read Hot Pursuit by Lynn Ray Harris. So I read it for the challenge to read a new to me author. It is another romantic suspense book, and I knew that I wanted to try some more of those books because I did have Uncharted sitting there on my Kindle, but I was hoping to read that at the end of July, but I just clearly needed to read that one earlier. This is the story of Evie and Matt, who grew up together as friends in New Orleans. This all changed when, in her teens, Evie asked Matt to take her virginity, and then some things happened and the 2 became estranged and Matt moved away. He eventually joined the army, and he has become the team leader of a hostile operations team. And at the beginning of the book, his team is out in the field and something doesn't feel right, and they continue with the mission, and then it ends up with 2 of his teammates being killed and the rest being taken hostage for 10 days. Now back in the States, his leadership is being reviewed by the military, and so he goes home for a couple of days, and there he crosses paths with Evie, who's also returned home after the bistro that she tried to open in Florida failed because someone that she hired ended up stealing her money, and this guy had connections to the mob. So she's come back home, she's trying to rebuild her life. She lost all of her life savings. The last person she wants to talk to is Matt because of their past. But then Evie's mother is attacked in her home, and then her sister is kidnapped by the same mob, and the only person that Evie can turn to is Matt, and the 2 begin to try and figure out why they've come after Evie. This one was fun. It was set in New Orleans. It was very atmospheric. There was a lot of intrigue, and I enjoyed the reading experience. So those are the books that I read in the last 7 days. I had a really great reading week. I thoroughly enjoyed all of the books. I will be picking up more romantic suspense in the future. So if you have any recommendations for that, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, feel free to let me know what you have been reading in the last 7 days. If you want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, leave a fire emoji down below. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.